Hi, my name's Liz, and I'm part of the Add Past Your Future project here at Museums Northumberland. We're really interested in finding out all about the history of Newcastle, North Tyneside, and Northumberland, and telling you all about it. We also want to share some exciting careers that are available in our area with you. We hope you enjoy them. Later on, we've got a special guest who's going to answer some of your questions too. In today's assembly, our special guest is Don O'Meara, who is an Archaeological Science Advisor. But before we meet him, we're going to be finding out about some other jobs that help us to uncover the past using science, technology, engineering, and maths. The first job we're going to look at is an archaeologist. Archaeologists study past human activity throughout history by finding places where they think there's evidence people have been and investigating, normally by digging, to see if they're right. They're curious and like to make new discoveries and answer questions we might have about the past. Some things to look for might be quite obvious. There might be carvings on rocks, or there might be ruins of structures for us to see. Here you can see Hadrian's Wall and one of the mile castles along it. Other things might be buried underground, so archaeologists must be observant and look for clues in the landscape, such as bumps or shapes, maybe shapes that look like walls. And this will give them ideas about where to dig. Can you see anything on this picture that you might want to investigate? When archaeologists do find a site they want to investigate, they might excavate the area. They'll dig trenches and see what they can find. They need to look very carefully so that they don't miss any artifacts in the ground. And they use lots of tools in their work. When archaeologists are digging things up, they'll need to figure out when they're from. They could be from lots of different time periods, maybe from the Bronze Age, Iron Age, Roman or medieval times. And so they need to be good communicators to share their findings with others. Quite often these things get cleaned up and put in museums so that we can find out all about them too. Another job is that of a geospatial surveyor. Geospatial means the position of something. A geospatial surveyor maps the shape of a place or object to make an accurate model of it. And these models can be used to help plan construction projects or the redevelopment of land. They can also be used in heritage to help us record and monitor historic sites and objects. The data collected can help us understand more about the past. Geospatial surveyors will use lots of different equipment and techniques to help with their work. Here you can see a drone flying around the heapstead at Woodhorn Colliery. It's taking lots of pictures as it flies around. The photos from this drone will be combined together using computer software to create a 3D model of the heapstead. Laser scanners can also be used to make models. They accurately record the size, shape and position of objects. This one is scanning the surfaces on the heapstead, and this information will be collated together to make a model that looks like this. Geospatial surveyors need to be organised to make sure they accurately scan and record information about a landscape. They also need to be logical to analyse the information they've collected, and collaborative because they'll be sharing this information with lots of other people and working together with them. Every day is different in this job. One day you might be out scanning a site and capturing information, and another day you might be at your computer processing the information that you've collected. Our last job is that of an architect. Buildings are designed by architects. Some architects nowadays just design new buildings, whereas others provide advice on how to look after and repair historic buildings. Over the years, different styles have been in and out of fashion. Can you see any buildings you recognise here? Architects use math skills as well as knowledge of materials and their properties to come up with designs, make recommendations and advise how to look after the buildings. Look closely at the buildings next time you go out for a walk and see if you can spot different styles of architecture and the different materials that have been used. Architects need to be creative when designing new buildings, as they might need to fit in with a particular style or have certain eco-friendly features – like these solar panels that you can see on this house here. Architects also need to be observant with an eye for detail. If they work on historic buildings, they'll need to suggest the best way to repair and maintain each building, and be curious to keep up to date with the research on the latest conservation techniques and guidance. Okay, so today we'd like to welcome Don O'Meara, who works for Historic England. Don is an Archaeological Science Advisor, and we've been sent in some questions by young people around the region for him to answer. You need to.
Yeah, perfect. So one of the first questions I was asked was, what made you choose this career and what did you need to do? So one thing that I was really interested in with archaeology was that I could travel and look at sites around the world. So when I was in school, I really wanted to travel and see different places, and I really liked history and I really liked being outside. So I thought archaeology would be a good choice. So I studied archaeology in university, and when I was in university during the summertime, I would go to different archaeological excavations around the world, so I could learn about digging and learn about the history of different places. So in the picture there by the lake, that's me when I was in Alaska in the United States for 6 months, and we were digging and looking for evidence of the early people of Alaska, and that was really interesting, looking at the stone tools that they use and looking for places where they were living and looking for evidence of the animals they were hunting. So I really enjoyed that when I was in university, and after that trip I thought I really wanted to be an archaeologist. And then in the other photo, that's a picture of me in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. So again, I really enjoyed traveling, and I wanted to see Central Asia and see the very, very different archaeology they had there. So I spent 2 summers in Kazakhstan doing archaeology, and I really enjoyed that as well. So I really like traveling, so that was good. And to be an archaeologist, ideally you need to go to university and study archaeology. And then another question I was asked, what was the first thing you found and how did it make you feel? I think one of the very first things I'd found was when I was in Alaska, and we were doing some survey one day where you walk along and you try to find evidence of artifacts that are left on the surface, so things like stone tools or stone arrowheads. And I found a small stone arrowhead on one of the first days that we were surveying, and that was really, really cool because that had been dropped hundreds of years earlier, and it had laid on the surface just waiting for someone to find it. So it was really good to find that and to pick it up. In the picture there, that's from Kazakhstan. That was from an Iron Age burial site, so that's about 2,500 years old. So we were digging in a site and we found the remains of a house and that we were digging into, and there I'm holding a pot that we found in the house and that we dug up one day. So it's really great when you find something that's very old and maybe something that nobody has touched for hundreds of years or even thousands of years. So it's always very, very exciting, but that can be anything from a stone tool to maybe a pot or even a piece of bone. It's always really, really great when you find something new and different. The next question was, do I enjoy my job and is it hard? The job can be hard sometimes. The picture of me on the right where I'm absolutely covered in mud is from a job I did down in Cambridgeshire. So in that job I was, it's called coring. So I was pushing a steel tube into the ground to pull up little bits of soil that are buried very, very deep. So I was collecting samples for us to study back in the laboratory. It was really wet that day and the field was really, really muddy. So there are some days where it can be quite uncomfortable. Sometimes, depending on the weather, it can be quite cold or it can be quite wet. But I think when you're outside and when you're doing something you enjoy, that makes it really worthwhile. The other picture on the in this slide is obviously very, very different. That's from the desert in Central Asia, and that was a day when we were walking around an abandoned city in the desert. And on that day it felt really, really special, and the weather was really lovely, and I was with some really interesting archaeologists from Kazakhstan. So there are some days that are really tough, but whether you're working in England or anywhere else, there are always days when you feel really, really lucky to be an archaeologist as well, and that's what I really, really like about the job. The next question was, can you give us some examples of the techniques you use? So my own particular area of specialism is called environmental archaeology. So I look at the evidence for the environment and how people interact with the environment, how they, what plants they use, what animals that they have around their houses, and how they use those animals. So one thing I look at a lot is the seeds and evidence of wood and charcoal from sites. So in the slide on the left, those are Bronze Age cereal grains that I found from a site I'm looking at in Northumberland. So from just north of Newcastle. These were from the Bronze Age people in Northumberland who were living about 3,000 years ago. So this is the same time as Stonehenge is being built down in southern England. And these are grains of emmer wheat that we found, and it shows the type of cereals that they're growing and the type of food that they're eating. So a lot of the work that I do now is at a microscope where I collect samples from archaeological excavations, and then I take them back and I sieve out the seeds and I try to identify the seeds and what they tell us about the past. Other techniques I use, I also look at animal bones. So in the picture on the right, there I'm looking at an elephant's tooth that we found in Penrith. So a few years ago when we were doing a job in Penrith, we found the tooth of an elephant, which is obviously very strange to find something like that in England. But there I'm looking at the tooth and I'm taking a sample. So we took a sample to find out maybe the date of the tooth and where the animal might have come from, and we found out that it was probably around 200 years old, but we were it's still a bit of a mystery as to how it ended up in Penrith, and maybe it was a souvenir someone brought back from somewhere else, or maybe it was an antique that someone threw out eventually. So that was quite a mysterious project, but it was really interesting to try to investigate that and see what we could find out. Another question, which is a really, really important question for archaeology, is why are some things preserved, for example, skeletons, and other things not, for example, clothes? So the picture that you can see there, that's from a site I was doing near Newton Aycliffe, so in County Durham, just south of Newcastle. That's the burial of a horse that we found when we were doing an excavation, and that was probably around 700 years old when that horse died and was buried on the site. Two really important things as to why some things are preserved and some things are not are to do with moisture, so how wet something is, and whether it's exposed to air. So those are two really, really important things. And the other thing is, if something is soft, it will break down faster than something that could be quite hard. So if you think of something like a book can be kept on a library shelf for many, many hundreds of years. If you go into a museum or a really old library and you can see really old books on the shelves, those books can stay for a long, long time, as long as they're kept dry and as long as they don't get wet. If you imagine taking a school book and putting it out outside for a few days, it would really, really quickly start to get damp and the pages would start to break apart. And that's because it's kept in conditions that isn't really good for its preservation. If something's hard like bone, it will last a lot longer than something soft like a piece of clothing or things like the pages of a book, or even things like food or other softer material that people might have. So it's really important it's really important to think about how hard the material is, but also where it's being kept. In somewhere like Egypt, you get really fantastic preservation because it's so dry that things can be preserved for a long, long time that we would never get in England, because in England the air and the weather is just very damp, so we don't get the same type of preservation. But understanding why some things are preserved in certain areas and not preserved in other areas is a really, really important part of archaeology and something we think about a lot. Another question I was asked is, what is the oldest thing I found? The oldest thing I found was probably, again, this is a picture of me when I was in Alaska, and we were just near a site which was probably, when we were doing our field survey, we found a site that was probably around 10,000 years old, we think. So that was a really, really old site, and it's evidence of some of the really early people who were moving into the Americas after the last ice age. So that was really, really amazing to find some of their stone tools in an area where we were excavating. As we were walking through the landscape, we would stop in some areas, and you can see I've got a shovel, and on my back you can see I've got a sieve. So we would dig what are called test pits and dig into the ground and sieve out the soil and try to find evidence of stone tools. And at this particular area, which is just near the edge of the mountains, we found really, really early examples of stone tools. But even in somewhere like in England, I found lots of very old sites as well. So I had a site from near Blackpool, was 3 years ago. And when we were digging, we found evidence of a Mesolithic fireplace. So that fireplace, we sent some of the charcoal for radiocarbon dating, and the radiocarbon dates told us that the site was about between 8,000 and 7,000 years old. So again, that's a very, very old site, and that's in somewhere near Blackpool, where you don't think of as being very ancient, but there are ancient sites all over the place if you know where to look. And sometimes they come up where you expect them, and sometimes they come up where you don't expect them.
Oh, well, thank you very much for coming along and taking part. I'm sure the children will love to hear all about your answers. I know I've certainly enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for watching our assembly, and thank you to the schools participating in the Our Past Your Future project for sending in such fantastic questions. And thanks again to our special guest, Don O'Meara.